Is Halo Combat Evolved a bad game?
You think it outright sucks, huh?
I think at the time it was really good, but I definitely don't think that shit holds up at all.
Really? So you wouldn't even say it's like, oh, it's like a decent time, like you'd pick up and play it and have a good time? Like you think it's legit, like I would not touch this game again?
I will not touch that game again. It's like a...
Alright, what's up everybody? My name is Sen. Welcome back to the channel. And for today's video, I wanted to talk about Halo Combat Evolved. This work has been a long time in the making for sure. I've wanted to talk about this game for some time. Originally, I was going to make a retrospective on this game specifically a long while ago, like 5 years ago by now, but ultimately decided to scrap it because I was just doing nothing but hating on the game. With that last playthrough, I did not give myself the tools to enjoy the game the most possible. Every play session at that point in time in my life was very rushed. I was lucky if I could get an hour of gaming in, and even then I was rushing through every playthrough, just trying to get the most amount of things done that I could, and not really giving myself a foundation to actually enjoy the game upon. Halo Combat Evolved, alongside the original Xbox, came out on November 15th of 2001, and my older brother would get said console and game for Christmas that year. And a lot of my thoughts and opinions on the game originally were based around those good memories from being a child and playing the game in a significant way with my older brother. And it wasn't so much the experience of the game that was important to me, it's more so the time that I spent with my brother. But after that point, from when I was a kid, I wouldn't return to the franchise for some time until that last playthrough, which was like 20 years apart, give or take. After that playthrough though, I would constantly rag on the game. I would openly criticize the game as just not holding up throughout the course of time, and sure, what it did for gaming was really important, but above and beyond that, the game didn't really do much. On my shared channel, DualShock, I said I would never play the game again, I wouldn't touch it, but that was actually a lie because I wanted to attempt to reevaluate my feelings here. Now, the biggest contributing factor for my open criticism of the game with like friends or family or whoever was actually Doom 2016 and my recently playing of that, I think a year ago now, and how good of an experience that was just from a mechanical standpoint. I would be using that same criteria that was so good about Doom 2016 and then apply that to Halo Combat Evolved, further reinforcing my idea that Halo Combat Evolved just did not age well. The things and pretenses I would be judging the game under would be, of course, gameplay, audio/sound design, visual elements, and narrative. Once again, I would compare Halo Combat Evolved to Doom 2016 just of a example of what a good game is in a genre adjacent game, I guess. While Halo Combat Evolved and Halo as a whole pulls elements and things from the boomer shooter genre, things like finding health packs or invisibility or supercharging your armor, things of that nature. And even just down to the way you move across the game, it's very floaty. It never reaches the highest heights of what you're actually capable of doing in those games. Think of it more as a boomer shooter light. The biggest thing I could give praise to within Doom 2016 was the drip feed that it would give you between the enemy variety and the weapons that it would give you to tackle your opposition at any given time. The moments where you would start to feel comfortable in the combat, it would give you something new to combat and also a new way of handling that obstacle in front of you. Once again, taking that same criteria to further evaluate Halo Combat Evolved and whether it does or doesn't hold up. Let's start with what you're actually in control of, and it's honestly not a whole lot. Can't expect too much of the game that came out in 2001, I totally understand that, but it's the thing you're doing throughout the whole game. You got a gun. You're going to be primarily navigating through the space with two types of weaponry, whether that be the human artillery or the alien/Covenant. And when I was a kid, the first thing I would do was naturally gravitate towards the alien tech because it was alien and it was cool and I was a little kid and fascinated by it. I loved the plasma pistol, but funnily enough, on my return, things changed rather drastically. Part of that's just the availability of the human artillery. It's really easy to get your hands on, but also the general effectiveness as well. On the side of the human artillery, starting things off with the assault rifle, generally it was not bad just because of the abundance of ammo that you could find, but it was generally a weaker weapon, less effective, but it definitely did have its use cases in moments of combat. Typically it was great to take out weaker enemies like the grunts or the little parasite-like enemies from the Flood. I call these guys the Colonels because in the old textures, the bigger Flood looked like popcorns, so. Next up being the Magnum Kingdom, and this was a more than pleasant surprise to come back to. I generally remember this weapon as being rather effective, but it was so much better than I remembered. I used it a ton on elites, but was generally good across the board. It does have a zoom in function, which makes this thing feel like a little hand cannon mini sniper thing. Fucking awesome. The shotgun was the weapon that by far carried me through the course of this game. There were many situations where I'd be hunkered down in a corner with low health and shield, praying for my life, pumping round after round into whatever foe opposed me. If I saw this weapon on the ground, I was picking it up. Get your montages ready because we're moving on to the sniper. This was easily the best feeling weapon in the game, second best of course being the shotgun. This was the only weapon in the game that would remotely promote a somewhat stealthy approach, being able to somehow silently take down enemies without them being the wiser. Generally, if you offered up a headshot to any enemy, they'd be down for the count. I did, however, run into one problem throughout the game with this weapon. I'm not sure if this was a glitch, it very much seemed like it, but for the flood/infected enemies, it didn't matter how much I shot them, they would not die as a result of me using the sniper. This would lead to me completely abandoning my favorite weapon in the late game. And finally, on the human side, the rocket launcher. This was going to be as close to a power fantasy as you were going to get as far as raw artillery is concerned. Much like the use of the grenades, you had to be careful about not sending yourself accidentally to the last checkpoint that you were at. This weapon was a ton of fun to use in spite of its low ammo. However, I guess on the PC version of the game, there was a flamethrower. I didn't know that and never used it, so no comment. Let's move on over to our opposition, aka the Covenant. An original favorite of mine, the plasma pistol. As a little kid, I would pick this weapon up all the time, but found myself falling out of favor with it, and just kind of generally gravitated towards other weaponry. This weapon, as well as the plasma rifle, are battery powered, so instead of running out of traditional rounds, you would run out of juice. I still use this weapon quite a bit, but found myself using a plasma rifle quite a bit more. The one thing you can do with the plasma pistol is a charged full power shot, which would temporarily drain the battery of the gun, but most of the time kill an enemy, at the very least drain them of their shields. The plasma rifle generally had a bit less travel time with each shot fired, both weapons generally being very effective. I found these weapons far more effective than the human weaponry against future enemy, the Legion. The Needler! I didn't really use the gun much, maybe like twice because I was desperate. This weapon takes a damage over time kind of approach. The more needles fired that stick into an enemy, the more effective the inevitable explosion is. Our final inclusion is only a half inclusion because while you could see enemies using this gun, you yourself could not pick it up until the next game, and that is the fuel rod gun. It's more or less the equivalent of an RPG for the Covenant. Finally, your lethal equipment, aka your grenades, being the standard frag grenades or the Semtex or sticky grenades. That's about it. While this game doesn't have a heap ton of weaponry, it's, I would say, satisfactory considering the game that it's placed in. With that said, the basic gunplay is satisfactory enough to have me not be bored, but also not quite engage me the way a different game might have. As far as raw impact, it was more satisfying to play than something like a BioShock, which I would generally say the gunplay was rather unsatisfying. But it's not as if the game makes you switch up how you approach any given situation. Kind of furthering the point that this game is a boomer shooter light, or a watered down version of a boomer shooter, you do have some minor power-ups that I mentioned earlier, aka the overshield, supercharging your defensives, making yourself a little bit more durable in the field of combat. You also have a invisibility power-up, which feels so very outside this game. You would think it would promote some more of a stealth approach, and to that capacity you're right, but it doesn't do enough of a job to make any missions you're taking part in actually feel like a full-blown stealth mission. The last thing that generally affects your gameplay is there are a slurry of vehicles that you have access to throughout the course of the game. We have the Cybertruck, aka the Warthog. So badly did I want an RC car version of this vehicle when I was a little kid, but I never got one. So I'll be crying myself to sleep tonight. You can travel around the terrain in this space Uber as a 2.5 seater. It has enough room for you as a driver, your girl in the passenger seat, and then your third wheel homie firing off rounds in the back with the mounted turret. I think you only have access to 2 of the 3 vehicles from the Covenant. The 2 you have access to being the Ghost and the Banshee. The Ghost being a little personal attack vehicle which has access to all kinds of movement as well as being able to fire plasma rounds, equivalent of the plasma rifle, I would say. While the Ghost only has access to ground-based travel, the Banshee would take to the skies in a very vertical way of traversal. It also has basic artillery purposes as well as a secondary fire, which seems the equivalent of a grenade shot. I don't know what you would call this. It's a It's a super shot. I don't know. I don't know if you can actually access the Covenant like tank, but if you can, I wasn't able to do it. I think that might be only a second game thing. I'm not really sure. Let me know if you can. And I won't even lie to you, I flat out forgot that you had access to the Scorpion, aka the tank of all games. This thing fucking sucks. I hated being in it. This is the closest thing that might be a power fantasy in the game, and it's as slow as a snail. Sure, it's powerful, but it didn't feel as good to drive like the Warthog or any other of the Covenant vehicles. Who cares if it's effective? It's not fun to drive. Nobody's playing riding dirty while in the Scorpion. And while the weapon variety is surprisingly decent for this game, it doesn't do enough to shake up gameplay or make you approach any given situation differently. So then that would be left to the enemies / enemy variety to do that very same thing for you. And does it? For the most part, from the Covenant, it kind of threw your opposition at you all at once, for the most part. You're initially introduced to your grunts and elites. These are going to be the most common enemy that you run into. There's also the red variety of elites. I don't know if they're fundamentally any different. Maybe there's different health values. Maybe it's just an aesthetic difference. I don't know. The grunts are obviously very easy to take out. These are going to be your weakest enemies. These were the most fun to melee. I forgot there was a melee option, but yes, I definitely beat the shit out of these little fuckers. The elites were generally a bit tougher to take down for sure. The way they moved around was a bit more sophisticated than the grunts kind of waddling around. They would kind of sidestep and sway, as well as move in very awkward fashions, and were a lot hardier than the grunts. Moving on to the jackals, they are generally less hardy than the elites, but I would say more hardy than the grunts. They also tout a shield around with them. You have two means of approaching them, either get around the shield or break through the shield. And finally, the most interesting of the Covenant-based enemies, the hunters. We also called these guys the brutes. I don't know where that came from, actually. These guys shook up gameplay in a somewhat significant way, being the most tanky of enemies. You could either attack them directly on or choose to circle strafe around them and get to their weakened backside. I actually like this enemy a lot. It does the best job at spicing up gameplay, and for what it is, I will say that these enemies shake up gameplay enough between each other, but you see these enemies so commonly that you don't feel the significance in how they're actually different from each other. Apart from the Covenant, our major other opposition is the Flood. There's a couple different forms of the Flood, being the Colonels that I talked about earlier. These little small parasitic-like creatures that would go to attack you in hordes. This was one of the best uses for the assault rifle that I would run into, and made the assault rifle the most valuable at this time. The popcorn version of this enemy is slightly more interesting. You have to take it out as it charges at you, and once you do, it explodes into these parasitic kernels. But don't let it get too close to you, because it will damage you upon its explosion. And then what's referred to as the combat form of the Flood is the parasitic nature being showcased by taking over any of the elites or the fallen soldiers or allies that we'd run into through the course of the game. These were rather interesting because it really kind of gave off that boomer shooter feel with the way they traverse, jumping around at you with melee options, or actually able to use weaponry as well. These were the type of enemy that I was having trouble with the sniper rifle with, where shots just would not register as doing damage, so causing me into giving up on the sniper eventually, which was very sad. I enjoyed the sniper a lot. The last enemy is the Sentinels, which are the robots that are flying around trying to actually eliminate the Flood from taking over, eventually turning on you. I don't remember having too tough a time. I think on my initial playthrough I was having a tough time, but on my most recent I really wasn't. The most effective weaponry being the Covenant weaponry against it, or at least that's what I felt like. I would generally say the weapon variety and enemy variety is halfway decent, but neither does a significant enough job in demanding anything new or any new strategies from you. Moving on to one of the things I would also criticize about the game would be the visual elements of the game. It's kind of a coin flip depending on what setting you're actually traversing through. The most criticism I would give the game would be for any inside obstacles, because it just felt as if there was a copy and paste of textures where everything would look rather the same. This would be particularly egregious in places like the Covenant spaceships or even the Pillar of Autumn. The other side of that coin, and the most positive I would be about the visual elements, would be the outside terrain that you'd actually traverse through. My particular favorite being the kind of mountainside when you initially crash the Pillar of Autumn. I would generally say the visual elements is a net wash, as negative as I am about the inside elements being rather maze-like and being uninspired, I would say. You can absolutely accredit this negative to being hardware constraints at the time and just developer workarounds, but this still didn't get alleviated by any means on the actual remastered textures. Coming down to the visual design of the enemies that we'd be combated with, there's no doubt in my mind that these enemies are absolutely iconic and very well considered. They feel alien, and that's about as important as it needs to be. Moving on to the point I'm actually the most fond of, being the sound design. This game's sound design has aged incredibly well, from the actual gunplay and the punchiness of the gun sound effects to the lovely scoring of the game's musical moments. It is absolutely impossible not to feel like a badass when the guitar kicks up and you are just mowing down enemies. So fucking cool. With that said, this point is not to go by completely without criticism. There are moments where the music hard cuts out and it just sounds like the track just straight up ends. This is a weakness because it leaves you in this absolutely eerie silence that does not feel intentional and makes the map and moments feel completely empty. It's just weird and unsettling, and it doesn't aid the game. We're about to lose all of you now. Finally, we move on to what would be the toughest pillar for me to discuss: the narrative. It's not difficult because of the inherent depth of the story or that there's a ton to unpack here. It's actually quite difficult because I really just don't remember that much of it. As fun as this game was to stream, it actually caused me to not pay as close attention as I would have liked to, and that's just due to regular commentary and or talking to the chat at any given time. From my basic understanding and the help of lore videos, you as Master Iron Chef America were awoken from cryosleep as a response to the attacking Covenant ship. What I don't understand is why the Covenant were attacking. Is it due to outside circumstances, or is it because you are in proximity of the Halo down below? Are they even really after us, or is it just because they assume we're after what the Halo may or may not contain? After our encounter with the Covenant, we GTFO and crash land on the mysterious orbiting Halo. After our crash landing, we're informed of the survival of Captain Keyes, but also his capture, so rescue is in order. Upon reaching said captain, we're informed that it's likely the Covenant are here for something, and essentially we're just trying to beat them to whatever they're going after, which is the Halo Central Control System. Fighting through countless enemies, we make it to the control room in question, only to be left with a sense of mystery in the air that what Captain Keyes and the Covenant are in pursuit of isn't actually a good thing. The Flood get unleashed and bad shit starts happening, and we're then tasked by 343 Guilty Spark to retrieve the index, bring it to the control room so that it can activate Halo's defenses against the Flood. While this is well and good, Guilty Spark left out the fact that it would purge all signs of life so the Flood has nothing to infect, drying up their food source. Obviously this is bad because we're alive, and we also don't want to cause universal genocide. So now the ally that we had with the Legion are now our opposition as well. Because we don't want Halo doing what it does, we're going to blow it up. The best way to go about this is by blowing up the Pillar of Autumn that crash landed on the Halo initially, and the only way to do that is with the retrieval and help of Captain Keyes. Fighting through waves of enemies, we found out Captain Keyes is already too far gone and has been left infected as well. Punching out his daylights, we retrieve his neural implant so we can continue to pursue our task at hand. Things don't go quite the way we planned due to Guilty Spark's intervention by turning off the self-destruct sequence. So we're gonna have to do this manually. We throw some grenades in some vents. This causes the fusion reactor to blow up, and we get our job done and done. It's hard for me to say if the story is rather surface level or actually quite deep. I was left and still am feeling rather perplexed about it all. The thing that I think is the strongest is actually the subversion of it all. The forces that were once aiding us in our mission turn around to be one of the very things up against us. They have the perception that this is the right thing to do because of course they do, they don't have a conscience, but at the end of the day this is of course inhumane, and because we're no longer in service of them, we are now the enemy too. We at some point, I actually don't remember, are greeted with the information that this Halo is not exactly unique, it's one of many. And we wrap our story up with the most action movie line ever.
Scanning. Just dust and echoes. We're all that's left. We did what we had to do for Earth. An entire Covenant armada obliterated, and the Flood. We had no choice. Halo, it's finished.
No, I think we're just getting started.
Closing thoughts, I had a better time with this game than I would have expected. That might have been aided by stream. The gameplay was satisfactory enough, but didn't do anything that blew me away. The complete sound package from the audio design to the actual scoring of the game was wonderful, apart from where the tracks would just hard cut out. The visual elements are the most striking when they're being projected in the actual landscape of the Halo. Apart from that, any space inside is just rather uninspired, and the story, while alluding to more, just feels rather basic. It's serviceable. Saying something like this game is amazing for what it did for gaming, or that it's an incredible game for 2001 feels rather short-sighted. I've played games about as old, if not older, that are not good in spite of their age, they just happen to be good games. I'm higher on this game now than when I went into playing it again, but at the end of the day, it's fine. It's just fine. If a 5 out of 10 is a game just being okay, I would award Halo Combat Evolved a 6. I think if you go into this game with relatively low expectations, you'll be surprised to see yourself having a decent time with it. With that said, the thing that you're doing 95% of the time, which is shooting things, isn't all that interesting. I understand, I'm ready to be eaten alive in the comments. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video for what it was. If you guys want to see more, be sure to check out the rest of the channel. Also in the description as well, there's links to my main channel, my Twitch, and my secondary channel with me and the absolute legend Cody. I don't upload on this channel super frequently just because it takes me a ton of time to make these videos, but if you guys enjoyed it, the best way you can support me is just by word of mouth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. How far is that? I don't know my metric system.